When I say the title Star Wars, what is the first thing that you typically think of? Big epic space battles, compelling or perhaps less compelling characters, but I guarantee you the one thing that you think of above all else are lightsaber battles. Good or bad, lightsaber battles are a core part of the Star Wars mythos, and they're almost necessary in every single Star Wars movie in order to be considered any good.
Fuck you, Ryan Johnson.
And how lightsaber battles have been portrayed on screen has evolved a lot since their initial inception in 1977. Now, in 1977, in that original movie, Episode 4, A New Hope, the lightsaber battle was unfortunately limited by several factors. Chief among them being the technology of the time, the fragility of course, the actual models of the lightsaber, and David Prowse and Alec Guinness's old age, limiting the movement that they could actually exhibit in any lightsaber duel. For all these reasons, the duel in A New Hope is actually considered the low point of lightsaber duels in the saga, though you'll be happy to know that they do actually raise in quality from here on out. A lot of people like to say that the original trilogy's duels are very lackluster. I completely disagree. I think it is really only Episode 4 that has this lackluster duel, in which all we really see are two old men slapping sticks together. Episode 5 improves upon the lightsaber duel by adding a concept that we haven't seen prior, and we honestly haven't seen since. Horror. Yes, I know it might be a bit odd to say that a Star Wars movie goes into the horror genre, but definitely take a look at the duel at the end of Episode 5. It's a young and inexperienced Jedi apprentice, we'll call Luke, and a Sith Lord. There's definitely an element of fear and anxiety. The entire duel is meant to build up this uneasiness inside the viewer. On top of this, the lightsaber combat and the music is way better than it was in Episode 4, and honestly, it is a much better duel. The same goes for Episode 6, though the themes of which are actually completely different from that in Episode 5. Return of the Jedi also has a bit of anxiety to the lightsaber duel, but it's entirely different. In this movie, we're actually anxious with whether or not Luke is going to fall to the dark side. We know that he wants to pull Anakin back and out of Darth Vader, but we don't know if he's really able to. There's that constant fear of just failure in this entire movie, and this entire duel especially. But to wrap it up with the original trilogy, a lot of people often say that the original trilogy's duels are lackluster when compared to the rest of the duels. And while that might be partially true, each duel in the original trilogy improves in quality one from the other, and culminating in Episode 6, which is in my opinion the best duel of the original trilogy. Moving on now to the prequel trilogy, where we see a massive improvement in choreography and style of the lightsaber duels. Now, there are certainly a lot of complaints in the prequel trilogy, especially whenever a lot of people compare the lightsaber duels to more of a dance. They're very heavily choreographed, and that's true, but keep in mind that the initial purpose of the lightsaber duels was to grab the attention of viewers, to keep your eyes glued to the screen, and in that they are incredibly successful. Pulling from the kendo martial arts style,
4, 5, and 6, I kept improving the sword fighting. Faster, more intense.
In the prequels, the fighting style was set. All we had to do was evolve it. Kendo became my base ingredient. You know, kendo movies.
And in all of the duels, you really get the feel that you are watching two master duelists fighting it out, which makes sense compared to the original trilogy, because in the prequel trilogy, these are the Jedi and the Sith at their height. They have trained for years at this point, and with the exception of perhaps one duel in Attack of the Clones, I would say that all the duels in the prequel trilogy are way better, at least in style and not necessarily substance, but just visually better than the original trilogy. Now, granted, there is, of course, it's very flashy, and you do get the feeling like if someone were to just stand still, half of the lightsaber strikes wouldn't actually hit the individual, and there isn't really an emphasis on emotional gravity, though we could argue, of course, that the duel at the end of Episode 3 is incredibly emotional. With the exception of that and the tail end of the one at Episode 1, there really isn't any emotional depth to these lightsaber duels, and it really is just flashy, well-choreographed stunts. This brings me to the Clone Wars and Rebels animated lightsaber duels, and what in my opinion are the best duels that we see in the entire saga. Unlike the original trilogy, the Clone Wars duels actually are well choreographed, and unlike the prequel trilogy, the Clone Wars duels actually feel like they have some weight. It makes you feel as though if any blade swing was left unanswered, the person at the business end of it would die. Clone Wars lightsaber duels manage to perfectly balance the dance aspect seen in the prequel trilogy along with the actual gravity of saber swing seen in the original original trilogy, and in several cases the emotional impact that they see. A huge aspect of the Clone Wars is the setting, and the settings in the lightsaber duels are way better than I think any movie we've seen thus far. This brings me to Star Wars Rebels, and while initially a bit of a step backwards when compared to the Clone Wars lightsaber duels, the duels in Star Wars Rebels eventually do find their footing, and it culminates in what I think is objectively the best lightsaber duel in all of Star Wars. Granted, the duel between Ahsoka and Vader is probably my favorite just because it features my two favorite characters, but it is objectively by a multitude of metrics the best duel that we have ever had, and I'm about to tell you why. The choreography is stellar, featuring both Vader's style of fighting as well as Ahsoka's light-footed style of fighting. The setting is amazing on Malachor 5 and in the Sith Temple. The music is amazing, featuring themes of both the characters. The choreography, as I've said before, is great, but it also feels as though each saber swing has some genuine weight to it, meaning if Ahsoka never blocked any of the strikes, Vader would kill her, unlike the prequel trilogy, which I have said before. And finally, the emotional aspect of the actual duel. Two former friends, someone who Anakin was basically Ahsoka's father figure, and actually seeing those two fight against one another is really that emotional punch that all lightsaber duels should have. The Season 2 finale of Star Wars Rebels in 2015 was the peak of lightsaber combat. It featured well choreographed fights with good emotion and good settings, and every swing actually felt like it could kill the person if left unparried. Now, unfortunately, from here on out, we are going downhill, and yes, that means I am talking about the sequel trilogy. Now, in a lot of the featurettes for Star Wars The Force Awakens, we actually talk about the kendo style of combat, the martial art form that inspired lightsaber combat, and we really saw how all the actors like it's incredibly light, it's incredibly fast, there's quick jabs and everything, and so this led a lot of fans, myself included, to believe that the sequel trilogy would keep in the vein with the prequels, with light, fast movement. Lightsaber duels, while perhaps a bit choreographed, would be incredibly engaging and keep all of our eyes glued to the screen. This was unfortunately not true, and I remember back originally whenever they talked about it after the movie, they said, yeah, the lightsabers actually had real weight, which of course, lightsabers aren't supposed to have weight, that's why you're able to spin them around as much as you can, and unfortunately I do think this affected the final product, as the lightsabers were very clearly weighted in the duel on Starkiller Base, leading to a very mundane and almost original trilogy-esque lightsaber duel, which I understand that's what they were going for. In the production of Episode 7, they made it very clear that they were distancing themselves from the production of the prequel trilogy, emphasizing practical effects and the weight of lightsabers. Throughout just about everything, they emphasized that this was a return to form, that they were going back to the old film style of the original trilogy. And unfortunately, this is where the sequel trilogy faltered. This is when it was a bit of a regression, a devolution, so to speak. The fall of lightsaber combat occurred when the sequel trilogy started. Its peak had came just that very same year, and then as soon as the sequel trilogy started, lightsaber combat devolved. And of course, when it came to Episode 8, there was absolutely zero lightsaber combat whatsoever.
Fuck you, Ryan Johnson.
In fact, we just got Luke dodging lightsabers. This was when lightsaber duels were at their absolute worst, when filmmakers took a look at that and said, yeah, that's good enough. The Rise of Skywalker had initially tried to remedy this fact by pulling a Revenge of the Sith featuring multiple lightsaber duels in its runtime. However, only 2 are actually of any significance whatsoever. The other 3 pretty much are super boring, whether it's close shots or shaky camera. And again, with the production of this one, they tried to emphasize that they were going to make the duel even better, with people within the cast saying that this was going to be the best lightsaber duel you'd ever seen, emphasizing Duel of the Fates and all the promotional art.
This will be the final word in the story of Skywalker.
Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. Get tickets now.
Actually making people believe that this duel would rival that of Episode 1's. Daisy Ridley had gone on record saying that the lightsaber models were actually much lighter than they were in Episode 7, and that she was able to move a lot quicker, but when it came time to actually watch the movie, none of the models looked as though they'd been lighter in any way. In fact, in multiple shots it looked like they made the models heavier, like they were swinging around bricks. As I said earlier, it's very clear that they tried to emulate the original trilogy, trying to put weight behind behind every swing, but they failed to deliver the emotional punch that the original trilogy gave, leading to the worst parts of both trilogies being put into these. There's zero emotion, similar to the prequel trilogy, with the exception of course, the duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and there's zero choreography, similar to how the original trilogy was. Obviously, there's choreography, but it wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it was in the prequel trilogy. And unfortunately, this leads me to believe that the decline of Star Wars lightsaber combat isn't just a random trend. This is why I believe lightsaber combat got better up until 2015, and as soon as Episode 7 released, it went sharply downward. Now, that's not to say that we aren't going to get good lightsaber duels here and there. The duel between Ahsoka Tano and Darth Maul in Season 7 of Star Wars The Clone Wars is amazing, and was the first duel in animation history to use motion capture, and it was certainly one of the most entertaining duels of the saga. But in a very clearly noticeable trend, all I can say is that that duel is an outlier. It is not the norm, and it is not something that I'm going to look at and say this is clearly evidence that the lightsaber duels are getting better. To this point, all I can say is that in 2015 we had the greatest lightsaber duel we've ever seen, and then it sharply went down from there. But what do you guys think? Do you think lightsaber duels could get better in time? I purposefully did not include any video games, comics, or novels because obviously in a video game the duel is as good as you make it, and in any novel or comic book I only felt like including duels that we could actually view on a screen, either TV show or movie. That being said, what do you guys think? What's your favorite lightsaber duel, and do you see the same trend that I have, and are you, like me, hoping that it will soon get better? Comment your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you again next time.